This player card at the end of the new battle pass is a teaser for the next agent coming to Valorant, and we actually have a lot more information to work with than usual. There's a lore in Abyss, a voicemail that just got added in the latest patch, and of course these mysterious vines appearing in all the trailers and on the home screen. We'll start off simple though with the player card teasers, since Riot always loves to drop these in the battle pass. Like in the past we had Bulletproof for ISO and Chrysalis for Clove. This one is called In Bloom. Personally, I don't think there's too much to read into the name itself this time around, and instead the main takeaway is that this metal flower is related to the new agent, potentially one of their abilities, and then those hints of purple and orange will likely be present in their design. There's also a second player card related to that flower actually, and this one shows Omen reaching up towards it. There's also a few faces we can recognize like Viper and I believe Cyphers, and I think this card as a whole is hinting to the fact that Omen will be able to learn a lot more about himself and get some answers from this unknown character. I think a lot of people's first assumption, seeing those claws in the hourglass cell, was that it was literally Omen, so there will likely be a lot of similarities between these two characters, especially considering their connections to Hourglass. Now in terms of what class this agent is, it's not confirmed this time around. Previously the devs have told us what to expect, but for now we have no expectations from them. The most likely outcome is that they'll be an initiator, since that was the agent type they released the longest ago, but there's also every chance they're a sentinel, since that is the smallest class and Deadlock was still released almost exactly a year ago. Then in terms of the release date, it's a relatively safe bet that they'll release on the 27th of August, as that is when episode 9 act 2 begins, and it's also a day after the Champions 24 tournament. Normally this far away from the agent's release, that'd basically be all we have. A player card, their role and a release date. But again, this time there's a lot more to the lore side of things. First though, I need to explain what Radivores are. They're creatures that are affected by Radianite and were studied by Kingdom under the name Project Landfall. According to this email that used to be in game on bind, only 6 have ever gotten loose. 4 of these we are very familiar with, as each ability of Geckos is a Radivore. Then the 5th is the bear that Deadlock fought in the Unmade cinematic. The 6th Radivore is one we've never seen, and the only reference to it is this announcement on Sunset.
To all Radivore containment staff, subject ZN35 remains unaccounted for in the Dirac Ring. This entity can disguise itself as any flora. Please remove all plants from your workspaces until it is recovered.
So this mysterious Radivore has the ability to disguise itself as any flora, so you can already see how that's going to be tying into these flowers and vines. The one thing I'm wondering now is how sentient is this Radivore and what is their relation to our new agents? Is it going to be a case like Gecko, where it's just a seemingly normal person harnessing the power of this creature, or are we going to see something totally different where the Radivore has potentially even fused with a person? Whatever the case, in the hourglass cell on Abyss, we can see this silhouette moving around from time to time, and they seem to be linked to this flower that's being analyzed since it says prisoner sample on the monitor. You can find this in game in the A-Link area, and it's probably the same flower we saw in those 2 play cards I mentioned earlier, so we now have our link between that silhouette being held captive and all this metal flora. That's where Sky's voicemail to Brimstone comes in. Take a listen.
I swear, one day you'll pick up the bloody phone. We need to get some samples from this hourglass base over to the lab, all right? Because I'm down in the south wing and there's this flora down here. Brimstone, I have spent enough time outside to know that these things aren't indigenous to our Earth. I mean, it looks almost... Nah. I'm gonna go track down Gecko. Call me back.
Now it does sound like she's talking about multiple, flora or strange plants, and even though we only see the one metal flower, either way there's a pretty clear correlation between what she's saying and that announcement on Sunset. That's especially obvious because she goes to talk to Gecko, who is essentially the closest thing the protocol have to a Radivore expert. Deadlock is the only other agent who has a history with Radivores, and her backstory might actually be relevant here. She was put in this team named Ursa to go contain the Radivore bear. Meanwhile, there was a second team named Brier, who was unresponsive when Ursa tried to reach out to them in the Unmade cinematic. This is relevant because a Brier is essentially a wild rose or thorny bush, that sort of thing, and it just so happens we've got these thorny vines all over the new episode of Valorant. So if Ursa was the team for the Radivore bear, then Brier was probably for the team meant to capture this Radivore flora. But if they were unresponsive, we can assume they were unsuccessful, and then one way or another, this Radivore flora came into the possession of the Signs of Hourglass and ended up in that cell. It seems inevitable that they're going to break out at some point though, and in the splash off episode 9 you can even see something piercing through it, which honestly reminded me of what Chamber did to Fracture. We can also see what appears to be claws reaching around the cell, similar to the claws the silhouette had in the Abyss cinematic, and of course all these metallic vines as well. These vines can be seen throughout the episode 9 Act 1 trailer, and have their own little segment at the end as they expand through the ground. At this point it seems clear that the ability won't be outright plant life, as this all seems pretty metallic so far. In game, you can imagine this being a sentinel type ability, as it looks like it could be locking down an area, potentially slowing enemies, or maybe even trapping them in place. But having said that, that is just one guess of one of the abilities, so again, the class of this agent is still pretty uncertain. There's also this scene in the home screen, which I think is a pretty strong indicator that when this character breaks free, they're going to be going after Hourglass. We also see an Hourglass floating mysteriously on Abyss, so maybe they're literally going to break out and destroy this, which seems to be a very important artifact to the Scions. There's even a board on the map with the following message, and the part that says Pruning Vine stands out given what we know now. If Pruning Vine literally means damaging the Radivore, then you can imagine they'd have plenty of reasons to get back at the Scions. That's what we know so far about Valorant's next agent, who should be Agent 26. So if you guys have any more questions about them or any of the lore that's going on right now, let me know in the comments.